as well. Like you're
exactly. So as I'm duty bound by the state of California, I need to let you know that I'm recording you via video. I'm assuming you consent to this, Jeffrey.
Yep.
Very good. Very good. So we're recording now. I should give a little intro with regards. This is the last podcast that's going to appear in audio in the biotacast.org feed. I'm moving it exclusively to video now, YouTube. Last Monkey Standing is the name of the YouTube channel. I'll leave a link to that basically in the topic of the podcast, so you can see that and move accordingly. It's been a long time coming, these videocasts, Jeffrey, but you in particular lend themselves very greatly to one of these videocasts because you've just done such amazing, colorful, eye-catching work for the better part of 2 decades now, maybe more, 3 decades. 1990, let me do the math. Somewhere through there. You've been doing it for a while.
For a while, yeah.
So what top of my list of questions was last time we chatted, you were working on vestibular walkers, and I was wondering what state that ended up in.
Yeah, well, as I feared, there's so many other projects that were kind of piling up in my brain and on my schedule that I have not done much with it since then. So that's the short answer. I can show you what I have. Got the paper published in the A-Life conference proceedings, and nothing has happened with them since.
Well, that's quite sad, but I understand you have video that we can at least look at associated with the associated with vestibular walkers.
Would you like me to show that?
That would be wonderful.
All right, let's see. Let me see if I can do a screen share.
I think you can do a screen share.
Present now. Present now. Window. Okay. How do I share?
It should be the dots at the bottom. Oh no, it might be the little arrow thing. Yep, you've got it. Perfect.
Okay, I don't know what that means.
That means you're in a window, in a window, in a window, in a window. There we go. Oh wow.
Okay, so you can see that
perfectly.
And let's see if we can pick up this guy. Yeah, so here I'm picking it up.
Randall physics.
Yeah, this shows you that it's made out of a bunch of tetrahedra, 5 tetrahedra, in fact, where each tetrahedron is composed of 6 springs. Oh, let's try this again. Okay, good. You're walking. Oh, don't fall, don't fall. Let's start this one over again. See, these creatures are rather delicate because they are doing something rather difficult, which is they have evolved from a population of creatures that are made of these springs and balls connected up in such a way that the springs act like muscles. And those muscles are changing their lengths according to sine waves. And there are lots and lots of these springs in this creature that all had to evolve their parameters, the frequencies and the phases of those sine wave oscillations in the spring length, changing according to these parameters. That's called the central pattern generator. And this is one of the creatures that evolved from that to be able to approach this red ball in real time.
Very cool. So how much, how do they evolve? What's the speed of evolution basically associated with these walkers? This is one that you've calculated a little earlier, I'm assuming.
Well, let's try something. Let's see. I'm going to just have one tetrahedron. Now, this one tetrahedron, let's do a triped. So tripedal locomotion means that there's no pressure to walk on 2 points. 3 points is acceptable. And this one is a pre-evolved one, and its motions are such that it will follow this ball. But if we try to evolve a new population, so what you're seeing here is a population size of 100, and they start off randomly, and we're very quickly scrolling through many different tests, right, for the genetic algorithm to run. and it's basically running. And up here in the top left, you can see a window. It's going to take a while for this graph to show what's happening, which is these different components of the fitness function are changing over time, and eventually it will reach a point where it's good at following the ball.
That's very cool. In terms of the landscape, have you tried doing it with undulating landscape or anything like that to see if that's differently?
I don't have it here, but I do have an undulating landscape, and I was very excited to see that it was working, actually.
Oh yeah, no, definitely.
And there's a video showing that, and the reason it works is because these creatures are responding to their environment in real time. Every time frame, they're taking in the forces that are acting upon them from the ground and gravity and all of that sort. So yeah, I don't have a video on hand right now, but
don't worry. No, I mean, what you're showing is particularly cool. I think it's very inspiring. I tease my former, well, he will soon be a guest, Imi Khan, about how blocky walkers is basically the definition of A-life, but you've taken it in a very interesting and different direction, which I guess blocky walkers kind of did in some regard. But no, this is a new take on an old theme in the artificial life community, which I really like.
Yeah, well, when you think about the blockies, like Sims blockies and other things like that, those are rigid body geometrical 3D shapes, right?
Certainly.
And they're connected by certain torque forces and so on. And, you know, in the real world, rigid body dynamics is a pretty good approximation of very solid, inflexible things. But in the real world, there's a lot of flexibility. And in fact, the muscular systems of mammals are very pliant and responsive to all kinds of forces.
Certainly.
And so in a sense, building something out of springs affords perhaps a better representation of what's going on in the brain and the body and the muscular system.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah, so here's one. This one's pretty crazy. Let's try this one. Anyway, this is online. If you go to, I believe it's, you go to my website, ventrella.com. It's one of the first links there.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Certainly. And in terms of the source code, it's written in JavaScript, or what's it written in?
It's all JavaScript and rendered to canvas. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you for showing that, Jeffrey. And if someone were to get in contact with you and say to you, sorry, I'll bring my camera up as well. If someone were to get in contact with you and say, I really would like to collaborate on this, or, you know, how open source is it associated with what you've done with the distributed walkers?
I believe it's on GitHub.
Very good. That answers my question.
I think so. Yeah, I'm pretty sure, because the reviewers of the A-Life paper were saying, hey, is this going to be online? And so they like to have that, you know, to have it
Certainly.
Open source. So it's there.
Very cool. Very cool. JavaScript is quite the language, but no, I think that would be really fun. Hopefully one of our listeners or viewers, as they are now.
That would be great.
Well, yeah, but ventrella.com is basically the hub for all your work, and it's a good place to go just to kind of lose yourself in film and, you know, a wide variety of other aspects. Always visually just absolutely spot on, Jeffrey. So I wanted to, one thing that we talked about last time, which you continue to do, is build fractals, daily fractals, right? It's kind of almost a therapeutic thing that you do on a daily basis, and they do vary greatly. Occasionally you will throw a cliched fractal in there, but most of the time they're very novel things. And looking at them, they remind me very much of fern tree structures in certain aspects. And I think last time we talked, I said there's got to be an artificial life project in the fractals. And I think probably the artificial life of plants, to steal Bruce Dana's paper's name, I think would be very useful in, you know, just certainly we'll get to my news, but growing trees is something that's highly topical for me currently. And I think fractals are just trees, basically, in structure and these kind of things. So what say you with regard, well, firstly, why don't you display the fractals, since we have the benefit of you actually having it to display?
Okay, let me do another screen share. I'm sorry, I'm not as familiar with Google Hangouts, but let's see, share. Why does it take so long? Okay, here we go. Share. Now, can you see this?
Yes, I can.
I made this just last night of all. Of course I made it last night because I make them every night. This is a fractal curve. So normally this is evolved with a genetic algorithm. It may not appear so because it doesn't look very evolved, but as you very well know, in the course of evolving a genetic algorithm towards a certain goal, some fun surprises come out, right? And that's usually where the art lies, in the glitchiness, the wabi-sabi. Accidents happen, and those kind of bugs become features. I call this brain filler. I have a whole series of brain filler things. Here's one that might be more interesting in the sense that it is self-avoiding. So it is a self-avoiding curve. And I like to bring in, textures and imagery from other sources and put them in the background and juxtapose them and stuff, because it makes it read, this looks like a wooden sculpture or something.
Certainly. Have you ever made any of your fractals into a physical thing? Have you ever had them, printed or cut or whatever?
Well, I have a colleague here and he and I did a woodcut.
Oh, very cool.
And we've done a couple of those in which we would make two. We would cut two boards. One of them would be stained dark, one would be light.
Yes.
We would take the inverse of them and put them together so that they become like a puzzle.
Very cool.
A two-piece jigsaw puzzle.
Yes.
And those are really cool. And there's a makerspace not too far from here that has a larger wood cutter.
Oh, interesting.
I'm thinking of laser cutter, and I'm thinking of using that. I do like the idea of having them be one piece.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes it very difficult to fit them together, as you can imagine.
Certainly.
But it's kind of cool. There's a cool factor in that.
Very nice indeed, Jeffrey. Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about this stuff because I was talking to Gerald de Jong recently, and obviously he makes his artificial life into 3D sculptures now. I'm not sure if you saw that video, but it's very, very cool.
Yes, I did.
So let's move on to let's talk about Gerald for a moment now. He said he had a good chat with you with regards to his view that Bitcoin is artificial life. How be you in the swaying of this argument? Do you think it's a good argument? Do you think it's an argument that needs to be championed currently by certain members of the artificial life community?
Well, I am not completely sure of all the Bitcoin. I don't know if I'm completely convinced. I think Bitcoin is great and it's here to stay and it's important, and it has definitely caused a seismic shift in how we think about money and value and possessions and all those things. And it's going to accelerate a change in many, many domains of human life. But it's complicated and it's difficult for many people to understand.
Certainly.
It lacks some of the affordances that we rely on to understand systems that we want to incorporate in our lives. So
that's a difficult question, really. I mean, that's a very good way of actually putting the problem associated with it. I got a few impassioned emails and even impassioned text from someone after I put the Gerald video online, because they just felt so. I guess Bitcoin has a bad reputation, right? It just has a bad reputation amongst many, and I think you've hit the nail on the head with regards to your description specifically.
Well, the fact that it has an extremely good reputation among people and an extremely bad reputation among other people is a sign that there's something wrong here.
It reminds you of a particular political system that we both must be exposed to as well.
So I mean, part of the problem is just getting through this cloud of opinions and culture collisions.
Certainly.
That's part of the problem. But once you get through that, then it's like, okay, what are we seeing here? And then that is difficult in itself because it's just so technically complicated.
Certainly. What I enjoyed with Gerald's discussion was that he had components like inertia and other things to describe it. And I think certainly, although it was 6 a.m. for me, so I was in a, I was sipping my first coffee with him. It seemed remarkably convincing to me, and obviously relatively well thought out as well. It's interesting that he's never submitted it to enough. Well, out of the Artificial Life Conference apparently just rejects papers on Bitcoin out of hand. But I'm teasing. They probably won't if it's written by Gerald. Then perhaps it would be a different thing. But yeah, it does strike me that the idea. I mean, you in particular, your artificial life is so visually interesting. It's so visually sticky. It basically brings people into the artificial life train of thinking anyway. The idea that rather than being visually sticky, it was financially sustainingly sticky, and that's what kind of continued it on, resonated very heavily with me, associated with the potential to think of it. And I think also it, if it is artificial life and it does exist the way it exists, there's an important symbiotic relationship between humans and it, which you have noted as well. And I think that's an interesting juxtaposition of synthetic life doing something and humans doing something. And in fact, the synthetic life actually does it slightly better than the humans tend to do it. It's an interesting kind of compare and contrast when talking about. There are many different layers to this thing, which is why I wanted to have a chance to chat with you about it.
Yeah, I mean, I've had quite a few exchanges with Gerald about it, and he has a lot of really interesting metaphors, the lichen and all of those things. They're very interesting metaphors, and I'd like to hear more about that. I'd like to either get a better sense of how all of those metaphors fit together into a story that makes sense in itself, and also how it relates to the real world of people exchanging information and money and so on. And that I haven't quite got that connection yet. So I think I need to hear a bit more.
Certainly. I thought there were aspects of that in my conversation with him, but I can't remember exactly in terms of the interaction. But yeah, I think there are a lot of nuances here, and you're right to be skeptical. And I think it's certainly something that, Gerald is effectively retired now. He's reached that, place in his life, which I think we all aspire to in some regard, where all he does is, fun stuff currently. So I'm very receptive to any wisdom, because I'm certainly very much caught up in the rat race. Working in tech, you're just constantly caught up in the rat race. So this idea that there is potentially one method, I'm surrounded by paper, and I'm also surrounded by lead. And these are two things that I've filled my life with. The paper is surrounding me here. The lead is in little boxes kind of squirreled away through the house. And I've realized every 4 years, I could sell some of my books. I haven't yet done that. I could sell some of my lead. I haven't yet done that. And if you can weather something for 4 years, then there's probably sustainability just in the concept of Bitcoin, which I thought was quite interesting. I never really heard that take on it before. But it certainly left me thinking, well, do I buy yen or do I buy Bitcoin here? Like, what is the better investment? Certainly lead and paper, mixed feelings about lead and paper. But ironically, I buy occasionally little comic books when I'm in particularly comic book stores in Berkeley and things like that. I kind of squirrel them away in my library. I started pulling them out of my library and actually looking them up on eBay, associated with what they were worth. I realized that I'm sitting on a small fortune worth of just 20 odd comic books that I've picked up over the past 20 years. So it made me realize that this notion of commodity and finding commodity in things. I'm not sure if you saw the videos that I did of the rings that I had that came up after, because I talked about the rings in the discussion with Gerald, and I found 3 central rings, and firstly described them in one way, and then went back and realized that actually the one that was a Viking ring could be anywhere from it had a far greater kind of span of age in it, basically, than I had attributed to it. So yeah, it was a conversation that left me moving in a variety of different directions.
Hmm.
But certainly, I think he's, Gerald is well worth his time in terms of actually interacting with him. And I always enjoy my chats. He occasionally messages me about obscure elements in mathematics, which is the next question that I had for you. And unfortunately, he usually catches me in a grocery store in some way where I can't respond with him. Well, the same feedback that I needed. Your work specifically around number theory and mathematics always fascinated me. I have one of your books that you wrote early on about that kind of playful fashion associated with number theory and mathematics. Have you done anything more on that since probably we last spoke about it maybe 10 years ago? I'm not sure.
Nothing explicitly other than a recent project. I don't know if maybe just tangentially that I worked on a paper for the Bridges Math and Art Conference.
Oh, very cool.
And that'll be happening in Virginia. I'll be going there and presenting in August. And I came up with a way of creating polyhedral geometry with particle systems that fall into place using forces. So it's kind of like molecular engineering in this sense. And it doesn't connect to number theory, except that I have these questions in my head as to why is it when you put 12 particles in a system, the Thomson problem, which is a way of describing how electrons form around a unit sphere and come up with equidistant vertices. Why does it make an icosahedron and not something else? And why does 13? So I think, I don't know if there's a fundamental difference between 12 and 13 as far as a highly composite number and a prime number creating a polyhedral symmetry or not, but that sort of smells like number theory.
It does.
That's about as far as I've gotten.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, I've always thought about the nature between 12 points and 13 points is very, very different, and the force vectors are all out of whack for 13 points, whereas they're all perfect for 12 points. I have 12-sided dice that I look at periodically and just think, they are the perfect dice, basically.
I sometimes think about, we evolved from mammals that have 5, there's a name for this, where we have 5 digits here and 5 digits there. And
certainly.
I don't know, it started way, way back in amphibians or fish even. I don't know when this 5 thing started.
Yes.
But it stuck throughout evolution. And of course, we with our human culture and our brains take these 2 5s and make a 10, and our number system is 10 based.
Yes.
If we had 6 fingers, we might have a 12 based system, which is a highly composite number, and it's a very useful number in many ways. And I don't know how. I'd like to imagine what would our culture look like if we had a 12 based system. We obviously have 12.
Ironically, we did have a 12-based system. That was the previous system in terms of inches to feet and this kind of stuff. So yes. we did live in a 12-based system at one time.
No, you're right. Right. We do have 12. There's 12 everywhere. The face of a clock and so on.
Without question.
But anyway, I'm fascinated with 12, not just in terms of number theory, but in terms of human culture and how we've adapted to these number systems.
Certainly, months of the year. Yes, there are a number of 12s out there. So very good, very good. So I've been having an ongoing discussion with Dr. Tim Taylor, who will be appearing on a future videocast. In fact, I booked him on a future videocast about open-ended evolution. And my perspective of open-ended evolution is that it occurs in a variety of different computer applications already. You just need to keep your eyes open and look for increasing length chains, ideally, increasing complexity, things which, resolve around, finding fitness functions and resolving the complexity. There's more, more genes are needed, so to speak. They can be added accordingly. I used to write antiviral software for the Australian government back in the early to mid 90s. And they were dealing with a particular class of computer virus where the virus would inject random noise into its DNA, for want of a better term. When it didn't run, it didn't run. When it ran, it continued to run. And when it got on networks, it would do things like knock out printers and do a variety of different things. The evolution of the virus was, in fact, a trick associated with just adding in noise into the binary, and often meant that they would, not survive. They would die very quickly. But the ones that did survive had a variety of different behaviors. They were very difficult to track because they were, you weren't looking for a particular executable component. You're looking more heuristically at a series of behaviors, which I have actually written about. So open-ended evolution for me is, it wouldn't be a surprise if I found it. And ironically, you put your, I think it was a Swarm video online, and I had a discussion with Hiroki-sama about open-ended evolution. Well, I was discussing with you initially. I said, Jeffrey, do you think open-ended evolution would be possible with this? And you were like, okay, it's going to take a lot of time.
Yeah.
Hiroki has already done it with his evolutionary swarm chemistry. And I've been working on that. I downloaded the source code, got it to compile on a really old Mac. I was able to see it. The last time he published on it was in 2018, which explicitly calls out the open-ended evolution potential of it. The great irony is Hiroki wrote this simulation in 2011. It's actually his ability to study the simulation, which brings new academic work out of it, which I think is just a beautiful analogy for all of our A-Love projects, that if we had an infinite amount of time with them, we'd probably find very interesting things that came out of them. What is your sense associated with open-ended evolution and, artificial life, or even just general day-to-day interaction with technology? What was your feeling with regards to it?
Well, I would say the first thing that we would want to do is define it. The sort of quintessential open evolution is the one that's happening on Earth right now. That's been happening for 4 billion years.
Of course.
The fact is, we can only achieve a tiny representation of that. Another way to think about open evolution is if you have a what do they call it? Soft A life, a simulation that is running a simulation that is always doing something different. Is that open-ended evolution? I don't know. Different is not necessarily evolution is always doing something different.
Certainly.
Whether it's better or worse, whether it's more complex or not, in general, things get more complex. I suppose you could have a complexity measurement. So if you have
that is my thinking as well. Yeah, definitely.
Becoming more and more complex, even if you're not looking at what the goals are, what the ambitions, whether there's any communication going on. If it's becoming more complex, that's one way to think about it.
Certainly.
So I think there are many tiers and many levels of talking about open-ended evolution. And if you see it and you say, oh wow, that is it definitely did something new and different and novel, that's a pretty good sign. I've been thinking about it, and I may have mentioned this to you and Hiroki, which is that somebody was asking me if my cluster system could become open-ended, and I think it might be if I put it on the internet and had users do something with it, interact with it, and have it change with them.
Yes.
And because what happens is you're plugging it into an open-ended system. That's
very true.
That's really what it's
very
about.
True. Yes.
So
yes.
instead of trying to make my system open-ended, I want to make it responsive and able to adapt or change. And then I plug it into an open-ended system. And also in the idea, I've had this idea with my Wiglet characters and everything, to have people build brains, their own little AI module, and they can plug them in and they can change their brains and or make different genomes. So by opening it up to people to add components to it, that's another way of doing open-ended.
Certainly. I mean, ApeScript, which I wrote probably 14, maybe 16 years ago, is an example of that as well. With the notion that you could use a different cognitive model, you could use any model that you can program in this almost Lua C-like language. And that has been used by a few people to test different ideas that they've had personally about it. But I think the increasing complexity, which in many cases means increasing size as well, although there are very large house cats. But I think there's something to say about something that's changes its size as well as complexity. I think Hiroki is actually measuring complexity in what he's doing, associated with running many different frames, for a better term, without actually frames of movement. and then looking at what emerges out of that, and then pruning his own recipe. They're called recipes. They're metaphors for DNA. But pruning his own recipes and adding to the recipes. So the recipes can become quite complicated based on this feedback loop. The human is absolutely critical in that part, to look at the images and say, this one is definitely more complex than that one, or this one is more interesting. However, you could also write algorithms to do that as well.
Yes, right. Yeah.
So anyway, it left me, feeling almost a state of artificial life euphoria that I only typically get when someone writes my stuff onto the Unreal Engine, which is also coming up in my kind of news and notes. But yeah, Hiroki is just such a polymath as well, that, I'm looking forward. He too, I hope to be doing a video interview with, so he can talk about his work more.
Excellent.
His work on COVID alone, I'm not sure if you know about his work on COVID.
I've seen some of his simulations, yeah.
But yeah, it's just fascinating as a means of, as someone who's developed artificial life simulation for many years now, COVID, just the statistics of COVID, didn't always ring true with me, particularly living in San Jose, just getting a sense of the statistics as they were presenting them. So it is a very interesting question about who's left, who should be responsible for, a bad response associated with COVID. Is it the scientists' response? Is it the politicians' response? Is it a systemic issue, returning to your idea of, you having two competing groups that either really love something or really hate something? And I think it's a very interesting problem to talk about, and I'm looking forward to talking more with Hiroki about that.
Yeah, I guess I haven't gotten that deep into learning about his COVID work. I should look into that more. It sounds very interesting.
He's going to be a fascinating person to talk with. So yes,
I met him in Indiana on an A-Life conference years ago, and that's a conference where Larry Yeager was there, also Douglas Hofstadter, and a bunch of other people, and Hiroki, and I was like, wow, this guy's awesome. So
yes. He's a great. I mean, he's one of these people, and I've had this conversation with Dr. Umi Khan as well, where when you're in his presence, you just know you're in the presence of wisdom. Like, he just has that demeanor about him, which is very interesting. Many of us don't have that demeanor, unfortunately. But no, it always strikes me. There's a calm nature of the way that he talks and describes things, which is something to aspire to, I guess.
Yeah, very generous.
Do you have any other topics you'd like to raise before we get into my kind of news and notes portion of the recording?
What other things were there? Why don't I just show clusters real quick?
Oh, yes, that was the last one that you were going to, because we were talking about Hiroki stuff, and I thought clusters was a good example.
Let's see if I can show this. Yeah, okay. Can you see that?
Very slowly. It's just coming up, unfortunately.
I can see that. Okay. Yeah, that's true, because over the video, you just don't get the value of it. But I am recording this so I can provide that video later. Maybe this is not a good thing to show then, since it's hard to see.
No, I think it'll be fine. I'm actually remarkably surprised by how good Google Video is at this kind of stuff, although it's throwing to me speaking currently. But my view is that why don't you talk through what you see as the actual creator of the simulation?
What's that?
What do you see as the creator of the simulation in what we're seeing currently?
The value of the simulation?
No. Just in terms of, as you were creating the simulation, what was your thought processes associated with what you were trying to visualize? And I have a particular intimacy with regards to my simulation, and I could, look at it and talk about it. But there were a series of kind of things. This is developed. I mean, you've been doing swimming creatures, be they, very small or relatively interesting, for a number of years. How did you come to the idea of visualizing this? Is it just a continuation of Gene Pool and Darwin Pond, or is it something novel that has come out since then?
So I guess I've been doing so many different kinds of particle systems, both professionally and not professionally. I did a pretty extensive particle system for visual music systems, which was a small startup in Boston, where the particles would be emitted from a handheld controller that goes along with music. These are like musical instruments that were invented by Bill Sebastian. And so after having built many particle systems, I always like to think, how can I cheat physics? What can I do to kind of play around with the physics itself? And so what's happening here is that these particles are moving towards or away from each other, depending on their color. And that kind of brings up, interesting social metaphors or various ways of thinking about how organisms move. So it's kind of like, it's sort of in between biology and physics. And what I guess there are dynamical systems that emerge from this that are very surprising and fun, and they're very sensitive and delicate, and so they can be interrupted by other dynamical systems that come in and swallow them up or break them apart and so on. And as I was tweaking around and coming up with the forces here, I just kept making them more and more interesting without thinking too hard about it. And so that's kind of how it came about. And then I discovered that there's certain, if you play around with it enough, you can find interesting behaviors. Like this one is kind of fun because it sort of pulls apart, and the values that make these work are very sensitive, right? They can be tweaked ever so slightly one way or the other, and this behavior doesn't come out anymore, or a different behavior comes out. This would be something I would like to put out there for people to evolve, so people can vote on them and come up with I think there's some really crazy stuff that can come out of this that we haven't seen yet.
Certainly.
So there's that.
Well, thank you very much, Jeffrey.
All right. Yeah. So what's next?
So my stuff. I've been working with a guy called Nuno Barreto, who's taking my Ape SDK and porting it to the Unreal Engine. You and I have had many conversations about doing something like this, be it back at the kind of, I can't even remember when we talked about it specifically, but I remember a number of prior lives where we were both pontificating associated with how we could get our stuff out there. I mean, you were actually quite successful through, I think, your discussion associated with there, and what was the other one that you worked with, the Second Life folks? Yeah. And I was always I tried to port this to the Second Life server to get the Second Life client to actually communicate with it. So I've had many attempts at kind of getting the very beautiful and current cutting edge graphics version of the simulation. And now Nuno is taking this and in a very small number of days actually started producing stuff very quickly. He actually puts the simulation into a DLL and just basically reads out values from the DLL that he uses to create the environment. And I think it's certainly, just for the people I've shown initially, people are very visually receptive to it. And it's always the thing that excited me as well about the simulation. Early on, I got a grant from the Australian Film Commission, of all places, in order to develop a landscape simulation, a flat landscape simulation, to show the what was called at the time, probably Nirvana project still, it hadn't become Noble Ape, but the Noble Ape landscapes, basically with the apes walking across the landscapes. So I have a genuine sense of, just through my own coding, that this is an amazing way to get people involved with a simulation, and particularly through Unreal, which is Steam and all these other things that you get kind of for free out of that. So just releasing it free on that kind of platform, I think, would be a topic of conversation. We talked about Larry Yeager and Polyworld. Polyworld has always been, for me, the kind of golden, the top, the golden ceiling, basically, associated with this kind of simulation and visualization, even though looking back at the videos of it, unfortunately, it's no longer maintained. So Polyworld as an open source project, I think, is right for people to come in and maintain it. Larry Yeager is very happily retired. I've had some conversation with them about various things. But yeah, the maintenance of it, the maintenance of any open source project, particularly as Apple changes various aspects of what they're doing, and certainly Microsoft changes various aspects of what they're doing, is something that's quite time consuming.
Yeah.
So anyway, Nuno's work is fabulous. I hope to actually on this channel, because Last Monkey Standing is also a channel that I'm using. Just prior to your video is my conversation with Nuno just a couple of days ago about how to expose various aspects of the simulation to what he wanted to do with Unreal.
Do you have any videos of this?
I have a small GIF, or you might call them GIFs, that he created out of it. But my hope is that he'll have some video within the week, and I'll certainly share it with you on Facebook or wherever you, wherever I see you hanging out, basically, because it's very inspirational just to have the simulation that I've worked on for 20. It's on the 13th of June. It's 28 years, so we've just passed its 28th birthday, so to speak. And I remember many conversations that we've had about this kind of visualization, and just how this kind of and of course the visualization has become more a common language with obviously a wide variety of video games and these kind of things, which is just, if you could get the next generation interested in A-Life. Have you ever considered putting any of your stuff on Steam or anything like that?
No, well, there is one thing that the clusters particle system I showed you. I have a 3D version that runs on a VR workstation.
Oh, very cool.
But I haven't really developed it very much. So there's a friend of mine who, he might be kind of on his own project right now, Brian Dodd. But we might, I might ask him, how, what he thinks about this idea of putting it on Steam, because. But that's I don't know a whole lot about that whole system, so I don't know if I would do it on my own. But I am thinking of building out this VR particle system. My colleague Frank Delaglio is asking me to do that. He's a molecular engineer, and so he's
very cool.
Really, into this kind of thinking.
Yeah, no, I mean, basically, I met Nuno he was asking about Steve Grant's work on the ISIL Discord. So
Steve
Grant's work.
Okay.
I still am quite close with Steve. He and I have exchanged emails this week, just trying to encourage him to get into the video thing and show some of the stuff he's working on currently. Did you go to Biota 2 or did you not go to Biota 2?
I don't think so. Where was that?
That was in Cambridge. That was the one that Steve Grant hosted.
No.
So have you ever met Steve?
I think I met him many, many years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's quite funny because he and I live probably about 3 hours drive from each other.
Oh, wow.
And our lives have been intertwined. He was supposed to appear on a BBC Radio 4 interview with me in 2003, and he volunteered this fellow who I think is called either Nick or Rick Colasanti, who was a plant biologist who was creating artificial life systems at the time. So he was always kind of a white whale is probably the wrong euphemism. He was always someone that I wanted to spend time talking with. When we actually started talking, we realized that we had a number of shared friends, as you do in these circumstances. And we realized that we had a whole series of shared perspectives, but he's very much taking his own line currently. And I want to capture some of that in video. Anyway, so yeah, Nuno was a Steve Grant fan and came onto the ISIL Discord and asked if anyone knew what happened to Steve Grant. Well, I talked to him just at that time last year. I've talked to him this week. So I was able to point him to, I posted him to a bunch of old Biota Lives, both including ones with you on, and one with Steve, and just got, our community. This is actually on my list of things to talk about. Our community doesn't do a very good job of explaining who we are and what we're doing and this kind of stuff. I know you still publish in the A-Life conferences. That's another topic of conversation, perhaps for another time. But how do you see, for example, I was working with an academic, introduced her to your work. She then found a video associated with your work in a forum. I don't know if my introduction, the paper that I provided her, which was the gene pool paper from Maciej Komaczyński's book, which I think is just, if contemporary artificial life scientists, researchers, have not read much of Komachinsky's book, I really do wonder what we're actually doing with regards to the kind of explaining basically what the history of this thing is. And I kind of playfully thought I should just throw you into the mix with regards to these people on Discord. But it's an amazing time suck. It's like an old bulletin board system where you're just constantly responding to, certain communications, and you have to kind of train yourself to turn it off. Otherwise, you'd be on there 24/7. But the nature of, and Hiroki is on there. Literally, Hiroki was in the same, Discord server environment. But I was the only person that knew anything about Steve Grant's work, and had kept in contact with Steve and this kind of thing. So
Steve was involved earlier on. Is that correct?
With creatures and
with creatures.
Yes.
And I think he had a Kickstarter that he did later about a project.
Grandroids, yes. Which he's still gotten money. I mean, he basically has. You've got to understand, when you meet Steve Grant fans, they refer to him as a capital S scientist. I've only ever thought of myself as a capital H hobbyist at best. But the devotees, for example, Nuno did his PhD based in large part on his playing of Creatures 3. So there's this interesting relationship with the people that know Steve's work, because Creatures, we've come full circle. We're talking back to why artificial life games are absolutely critical. Because Creatures being out there and being something that people played, and perhaps parents bought them, or they had some relationship with this thing that Steve created, obviously with a bunch of other artists and a bunch of other people at the time. But Steve is kind of the pinnacle of that. So when you meet a Steve Grant devotee, they have a very particular view of who he is, which I think is fascinating. I'd like to meet more Jeffrey Ventrella devotees, actually, which was the sad part of this interaction, was basically papers, videos, and then finally, out of the blue, SwimBots were, something worthy of talking about. What is your sense with regards to this? Do we need another Levy book? I guess is my question. Do we need another? Stephen Levy wrote a book called Artificial Life that Larry Yeager was in. So I'm wondering if we need another book like that captures the kind of playful hobbyists as much as it captures the capital S scientists.
Well, it's possible. It might also be possible that we need to create another new breakthrough. And I'm not sure if that's. I think there are breakthroughs happening here and there, interesting discoveries and inventions.
Here's a question I'll put to you. I think I put it to you the last time we spoke as well. I think artificial life as a growing intellectual entity, Larry Yeager is a good example of this, actually created the petri dish, for want of a better term, actually, for contemporary large language models, cognitive simulations, neural networks, NEAT and Neuro, which were Stanley, as I said, is it Kevin Stanley or Keith Stanley? Keith Stanley. These people developed in the artificial life community things that went on to be OpenAI. There's a very strong movement between Larry Yeager's work and what is in OpenAI. Talking with Dr. Stanley, let's call him Dr. Stanley, probably Professor Stanley now, associated with his work is very central in OpenAI, specifically notions of neural network symmetries and asymmetries, and manipulating neural network symmetries and asymmetries. Just a completely different way of looking at neural networks returning to the brain as being the central piece. So these are people and ideas and things that have moved into, but now you have a new generation of academics, a new generation of PhD students who know nothing about A-Life. You know nothing about the way that you get from Polyworld into ideas of neural network symmetry, into ideas of processing language, into these kind of things. So what say you with regards to our particular responsibility with all the discussion associated with things like OpenAI currently?
One thing that this is reminding me of is the death of Daniel Dennett, which was only a few months ago.
Yes,
He died. He had become kind of a hero of mine over the years, and his death had, created a bunch of articles about him, and
did you ever meet him?
What's that?
Did you ever meet him?
Yes, I did. I actually taught a course at Tufts, which is right down the hall from his office, and he was one of the people that approved my course, and so I had one chat with him, and he, the course I taught was called The Art of Artificial Life, and it was
very appropriate.
Right after I graduated from the MIT Media Lab. That was a very heady time, but I had not met him since. But I read his book Back from Bacteria to Bach, which I probably have talked about already, and really blew my mind. And so I'm interested in how perhaps some of the buzz coming from his death might spill over for people learning more about him or about these neo-Darwinist ideas and artificial life, kind of tangentially. I don't know. There is a guy that asked me about open-ended evolution. And I said, well, read some Daniel Dennett. And he goes, well, what book should I read? And I said, well, start with Darwin's Dangerous Idea. I suppose that would be the best one to start with. But anyway, so gosh, I don't know really. I don't really know how to answer your question. I think artificial life is evolving as it must.
Yes, be a Bitcoin or something else.
Yeah, and sure, large language models are fascinating. I did a little bit of work on one of those for a computer game, and that's a whole other direction. I'm interested in large language models in terms of how they can be connected with a simulation, so they're embedded, so they're embodied. And I know a lot of people are working on this.
Oh yes.
So, but that's my extent.
I like the idea that Daniel Dennett is actually a better Dawkins than Dawkins is Dawkins with regards to conveying, ideas in science and evolution. And that I think is very powerful. It might actually make a slide on my they're called what is it called? It's ERA, which is Emerging Researchers in Artificial Life, which is a sub-conference that's happening at the front. I'm unfortunately an extremely old researcher in artificial life, I think, by the kind of age group of the people involved. Anyway, I'm giving a talk.
Cool.
And I think the idea of Dennett is a better Dawkins than Dawkins is a very powerful metaphor. So thank you very much for. I attended a lecture at university that was given by Dennett, and it had an impact on me. I at the time was very much enamored with Bertrand Russell, and the idea that Dennett was kind of that school, resonated very strongly with me at the time. I didn't have an opportunity to talk with him or anything. I didn't have any opportunity to have a personal interaction. I just saw a lecture, basically. And it was my time studying philosophy and physics, doing considerably more philosophy than I was doing physics, because that was just the nature of doing a full degree of philosophy. But yeah, it was certainly impactful in my life hearing him speak, and certainly his various eulogies.
When you say Dennett's a better Dawkins than Dawkins, I think I know what you mean, but tell me more.
Well, I think basically Dawkins has a series of things which, I mean, although I argue about my Dawkinsianness generally, because there's a difference between reading something and belief. And I heard a funny story from Gerald de Jong associated with the Douglas Adams estate. I'm sure you must have seen it in the video. But that was a large portion of my life, was actually dealing with, Dawkins' whip designer guy or whatever, and just a really kind of brief but hostile interchange associated with why they were taking images and things off the Biota site, as well as the full text. The idea that it was just a talk that he gave at a number of different conferences made me realize that it was probably less impassioned in terms of my particular perspective. But I think the the whole nature of science versus religion is just not a. I mean, this is why I'm Rosselian fundamentally. It's just not a conversation where you pick up the same bad argument styles and various other things. Like there has to be a calming logic that's part of that, and Dennett is obviously part of that tradition.
Right.
And the idea that he talks about evolution and biology in a way which is still sticky and still receptive, obviously, to folks such as yourself and myself, indicates to me that rather than being a particularly polarizing person, which unfortunately Dawkins has become, Dennett has been able to kind of live his life and write his books and not really get on the radar of the the religious right and these kind of things. Right. So I think that is quite powerful. And anyway,
yeah, I think there's a place for Dawkins in the world, and there's a place for Dennett in the world.
Without question.
I think Dawkins is a fighter, and he's fighting certain ideologies that probably need to be fought. I do like Dennett's approach to religion and science, and his analysis of it. It's much more it's not, like you said, it's not combative or argumentative. It's not making a point. It's just making a lot of observations, and
it's nuanced, right? It's nuanced.
It's nuanced, and it's really fascinating. I think everybody should read what Dennett says about religion. It's fascinating. He's also taken the memetics way out to a whole nother level.
Certainly. Well, it was a conversation worth having, basically. Let's just say that, associated with memetics and the whole nature of genes being a story is something that I reflect on and talk with periodically with people just in day-to-day life. And I think it's an interesting way, the kind of post-Darwinian stuff as you were discussing, epigenetics fascinates me. I'm not sure if you've spent any quality time with epigenetics, but fascinating factoid, the ratio of men to women, of particularly people that were touched by the Holocaust, but also people who weren't religiously touched by the Holocaust, but were just touched by the Holocaust from living in parts of Eastern Europe. The statistic is, where I'm from in Australia, there are 2 women to every man, Ashkenazis. The statistic, I think in the UK, is that there's, in some areas, like Leeds, for example, there's a ratio of 4 to 1. In South Africa, where one of my second cousins lives, there's a ratio of 7 to 1. So the epigenetics, just in terms of damage, or just in terms of changing the number of boys and girls that are born, is really fascinating. It could be what's in the water, but I think it probably is epigenetics in action. And I certainly reflect on Michelle, when we were first married, shined a torch into my face at 4 a.m. for some reason. She wanted something, or she wanted to wake me up or something. And she said my reaction was so completely out of character that, I kind of jumped in the air and then crawled into a fetal position and just started moaning. And I think that stuff, there has to be something that is conveyed over, because, certainly my father's life and times and his experiences were very much, brutal and really a reflection of the Second World War, as many people who experienced the Second World War have. But there was a particular component associated with his family not being there, and various relatively close relatives that had been killed and died, and a wide variety of kind of ghastly things. And the impact of epigenetics on just the number of boys versus girls, in particular, particular countries, particular communities, was always really stuck with me. And now, I keep finding little factoids in that. I'm not well read in current epigenetic literature, but I think it's something that fascinates me when I kind of pick it up in my everyday interactions. How much have you observed with epigenetics? Have you read anything good on epigenetics?
I'm not too up on that particular topic, but I have read and thought a lot about the interactions of genes with environment. And there's a book called From Darwin to Derrida by David Haig, which
yes, I know.
I started reading that, and I've been kind of reading it little by little over time when I have the brain space to do it. Very complicated book, but really fascinating. This guy is an expert in how genes, the environment that genes find themselves in, and all of the social interactions between them, and how it reflects the social interactions of animals and people and societies. And it's all reflected. There are mirrors all the way throughout here. And it just goes to show once again that there's no clear delineation between genes and environment, or nurture versus nature. That's an artificial division.
Certainly.
And the more people can see how they're intertwined, the better we can solve lots of important problems.
So, returning to it's a very powerful metaphor, I think, and certainly one that writing simulation with epigenetics would be absolutely fascinating. The fact that it favors girls, as I have twin girls currently, also weighs very heavily on my mind. If this is an evolutionary or an evolutionary process, having girls is probably what comes out of this thing. My notes have gone all kinds of backwards associated with what we were going to talk about. Let me just see, look at this, talk about unity. I think I basically touched on everything in one way or another.
Okay.
Aside from the fact that there are these two Discord servers. For a start, Biota on Biotacast has a Discord server. If you join that Discord server, as a gentleman by the name of Matt Andrews did, I will immediately pluck you from that Discord server and throw you into the ISIL Discord server, or the ERA ISIL Discord server, and allow you to have at it. Matt Andrews is going to be a future video cast. He might be the one after you, actually, Jeffrey. And he has written genetic algorithm open source stuff. I'll let him talk more about it. He's in no way connected with academia. He's in no way connected. The reason he got on the Discord server was that he just typed the word artificial life into Facebook and my Biota conversations with artificial life practitioners. He didn't listen to any of the podcasts. He just immediately jumped on the Discord server and posted a large paragraph associated with this work. So it's very interesting how these people become part of it. But my view is to continuously inject them into the ISIL and make sure that they're asking questions and creating disorder, basically.
Disorder on the Discord.
That's exactly the idea. That's the idea. So if you feel game, Jeffrey, and you have an extra 8 hours a day, or maybe you've already learnt your lessons with regards to forums and things like that, and you already have stringent behaviors like not having it installed on your phone, or just coming to your computer for a small period of time each day, and evaluating what you should type. It would be a pleasure to have you on either the ISIL and the ERA Discord server, or one of the two, because I think your work is so seminal to artificial life, and just in terms of visualization alone, the matching of kind of art and simulation.
Okay,
please consider it.
I'll take a look. Yeah,
and certainly folks like Hiroki are there as well. So it's not like you're not amongst friends.
Yeah,
basically. What was the name?
Have you used Mastodon?
I haven't used. No, my view is actually between LinkedIn, Facebook, and Discord, I'm way too connected already. And I have literally turned my device off every evening, just in text messages alone. You may have missed this, but I've become, for my, I did a 3-hour-long invigilated programmer exam and then a 2-hour-long meeting with the CEO. But I'm now the CTO of it's a US EDU social media startup to take on the likes of Discord and Facebook and these kind of things. So my view is that when we get that app out, which hopefully we'll get out in a fall time frame, that will probably be the one that I stick with, even though I don't have an EDU address. Do you have an EDU address, Jeffrey? Okay, we'll need to find ways of getting both of us on that.
Oh, EDU. Oh, do I still? I had a bunch of them.
That's what I thought. I thought you
Diego.
if anyone had EDU addresses, it would have been you.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, they may still be around. I haven't used in a long time.
Anyway, so that takes up some of my time. But yeah, I'm actually trying to kill the number of social networking communication sites that I'm on just to live a normal life.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I told you, but I was on Twitter. I've quit and then rejoined social media over the years, right? For various reasons. And I was on Twitter, and then it just started falling apart. And there was a cluster of people, really fascinating people that I was following and occasionally chatting with. Anil Seth, various other people in neuroscience. Oops, let me see here. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here. I can see you and you.
And so but I quit Twitter, and but yeah, social media is so addictive, and that's on purpose, right? But yeah, I scroll Facebook and Instagram more recently.
Interesting. Yeah, your stuff certainly lends itself to Instagram, I would say.
They all have their pros and cons.
Without question.
Yeah.
Jeffrey, it's been a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you very much for displaying your stuff. It's always fun to catch up. This is going to be the new medium going forward. So okay. As you develop more beautiful and elaborate things, appreciate that you will have the ability to show them. But thank you very much for chatting with me today, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Tom. It was fun. All right.
See you soon. Take care.
Okay.